of Easy Rider convinced the major studios that a similar jackpot could simply and cheaply be hit again by taking on young talent and seeing what it came up with. It was in this period, the early 70s, that a remarkable group, later on to be known as the movie Brats, came together in Hollywood. Among them were Coppola and Scorsese, George Lucas, Brian De Palma and John Milius, men who'd learned their trade at film school or by working on low-budget quickies for Corman and AIP. And then, too, there was Steven Spielberg, whose background was slightly different in that he'd served his apprenticeship in television filmmaking. What made these people dissimilar from any earlier generation of filmmakers was that, unlike their predecessors, they were strictly children of the audio-visual age. They hadn't grown up influenced by literature or the theatre. They'd grown up influenced by films and TV.
We were the first generation of film school people, as they say, movie brats, that were really fanatical about movies, had grown up with movies, could, quote movies. And of course, we just stole liberally, too, we were very good thieves, and you look at Star Wars or some of my films even. There's lots of references to Kurosawa and all of my other heroes, Ford and everything. I mean, we were very good at that. I mean, my second film as a director, The Wind and the Lion, was a very good-looking film. Well, I looked at Lawrence of Arabia a lot,
This group of disparate people became a cohesive unit when they all met by chance on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank.
I met George Lucas at Warner Brothers. He was finishing THX, and there was a lot of problems with that. Also, Brian De Palma was a very close friend of mine from New York, and he was working at Warner Brothers at the time on Get to Know Your Rabbit, which was also in a lot of trouble. And the documentary I was working on was in a terrible amount of trouble. So, and the man who hired me out there, Fred Weintraub, was the vice president. He was in a lot of trouble. He was being asked to leave by his best friend, Ted Ashley, who ran the place. So it was a very interesting time. And we got to know Spielberg, and Spielberg was doing television shows. And so we would just sort of hang together out of misery. We would just sort of sit down and complain, and George Lucas saying, "This is the worst job in the world. This is the most terrible thing. I'll never do it again. I'll just never do it again."
I yell and rant a lot, but I'm not doing it personally. I'm doing it at the ideas involved, because I'm just trying to make the film.
Francis Coppola was the first of the Brats to break into the big time, though not necessarily with such early Warner Brothers films as Finian's Rainbow and The Rain People. His success came later, but even early on, the new approach which the Brats brought to the industry created misunderstandings with the movie establishment.
I'm going to make the movie now, unless you can get the police to come and stop me from shooting, because I don't need Warner Bros. I mean, Warner Bros. can waltz out on the deal, and I've got the money to make the film. Unless you can get the police, the state troopers to come and tell me to stop, there's nothing you can do, because there's no law against making a movie. And
It was, in fact, by the merest fluke that Coppola was chosen to direct The Godfather.
Francis was the only Italian director working in Hollywood. And that's why I hired him, because he was an Italian director. And that's the only reason. When I hired him, Dickie Zanuck called me and says, "Bob, you're going to lose your job. The guy's crazy." John Calley called me, who was head of Warner's at the time, said, "Look, he owes us $600,000. We get his salary. As soon as he gets it, you're my pal, Bob. Don't hire him. He's nuts. You're going to get fired from your job." I hired him on the instinct I wanted the flavor of that Sicilian quality that he could bring out.
The Godfather was in the very early period of its success as a book. It wasn't quite the big mammoth book that it became after I had already been given the job. And I was very frightened of getting once again co-opted into another project like Low Budget. It was a very inexpensive film. And in those days, they wanted young directors because they wanted it cheap.
Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicum, Sanctorum Communionem, Remissionem Peccatorum, Donus Resurrectionem, Vitam Aeternam. Amen. Michael Francis Ritchie, do you renounce Satan?
In 1971, The Godfather won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Coppola, though merely a losing nominee as Best Director, was nevertheless the hottest director in town.
Francis was like the one who got in the Trojan horse. He got inside the gates of the city, and at night he came out and unlocked the gates for us to come in. And we found that the walls were undefended.
As guru to the movie Brats, Coppola exerted his considerable muscle to help his friend, the director George Lucas, by agreeing to act as producer on American Graffiti, But even with Coppola's support, the going wasn't easy.
Universal wanted to just dump the picture. They said, let's get it out in the drive-ins. This is a piece of junk. We're not interested in it. And George was conscious of the fact that music would make a tremendous difference to the film. And he went out and got a lot of music and laid the music into the film. And then the Universal people liked it a little more, but they still didn't think too much of it. And it wasn't until the film caught on that they realized that they had a very big hit.
You're tired. Well, at least I don't have to pull over to the side just to let a funeral go by, man. Oh, funny. You know what?
Your car's uglier than I am. That didn't come out right.
Come on, boy, let's go. Prove it. Why don't you go out and try to win yourself a few races? Man, you come on back and I'll show you a few things.
Oh, racing, you can beat him.
Hey, that's a tough-looking girl you got with you, man. What are you doing, trying to pick up a few extra bucks to babysit? Hey, dog, why don't you come on a ride with me? It's about 10 years. Now, leave her out of this. It's just between you and me.
Hot from the success of American Graffiti, Lucas struck a deal with 20th Century Fox to make his expensive space epic, Star Wars. You know, the one in the Flash Gordon mould. For Lucas, this entailed a big personal risk, for he spent more than $1 million of his own money on pre-production. And when the film was made, he used a largely unknown cast, with the exception of Alec Guinness, and a stunning assortment of special effects to create perhaps the most influential smash hit of the 1970s. At the time, and in one of his rare interviews, he described what he perceived as the merits of Star Wars.
It's a positive film. It has heroes and villains, and that it essentially is a fun movie to watch. It's been a long time since people have been able to go to the movies and see a sort of straightforward, wholesome, fun adventure.
It was becoming clear that the Brats, good friends though they were, had very different ideas about the kinds of film they wanted to make. A particularly good example of this was shown in George Lucas's reaction to Martin Scorsese's picture, New York, New York.
George came down to look at a rough cut, and George said, now, Marty, if all I have to say is that if the man and the woman at the end of the film walk away together, you're going to add $10 million to the box office. I said, yeah, I know, but it just not for this story. It just doesn't work. And so we kind of grew that way, and I knew that he was going for that, something that was extremely commercial. And although I don't even think George was aware of the impact Star Wars was going to have. He certainly wasn't.
By the end of the 1970s, Hollywood and its future were firmly in the hands of the movie Brats. As early as 1979, 5 of the Brats films, Lucas's American Graffiti and Star Wars, Spielberg's Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Coppola's The Godfather, were among the most lucrative pictures of all time. And Spielberg and Lucas, at least, went on to do even better. But what was the secret of all this financial success? Well, in part, it was to do with the fact that they were making B-movies writ large. Horror stories, science fiction, simple tales of adventure. They didn't go in much for profundities, nor even for films about grown-up people. They appealed mostly to a teenage audience, and in that respect, their line of descent came not from great directors like Ford, Hawks, and Capra and their works, but from B-pics and the exploitation movies. What the Brats had done was to take what were, in essence, the plots, situations, and characters of old-fashioned B-pictures, pump them up with money, and turn them into financially the most successful films ever made.